The 7 buyers of your business, we're gonna talk about what do they care about? What do they prioritize? You have to know what you really want. Main point, who are you targeting to sell your business? What are your goals? What are their goals? And how do you make them align? We're talking in time and money and people. All right, you wanna sell your business fast? Or maybe you want to stick around for a bit. You want to sell your business for the highest price point. Do you want to make sure your people are taken care of? Everything we're talking about is selling your business to the right people. Now, I'm not talking about selling to a partner or raising funds and equity. That's a whole different conversation. If you want to sell a piece of your business, that's totally different. We're talking about you are ready to exit your business either immediately or soon, which soon can be a year or two, or it could be a month. Right, whatever transition period you want to involve in this and whatever role you want to play moving forward comes down to your goals. So what we're going to be talking about today is first we're going to hit on your goals, and then we're going to talk about the 7 buyers of your business and how to best position yourself to sell to them. Let's jump in. Goals. You have to know what you really want before you start going listing things. And I've had clients that come to me and they say they want to sell their business and they don't actually know what they want. They haven't actually walked through this. And then I start pushing them. I start pressing them down. I had a consultation with a guy. I sat with him for 4 hours because he came to me originally talking about, wanting to be, maybe raise some people up in his business. And so, okay, I'm thinking team coaching. I'm thinking, raising some leaders up and all that. When I really drilled down to it, he wanted out of the business. He was done. And he realized then what he truly wanted was spending more time with his wife because that was a stage in life that they were in. Okay, well, that was the most important. And it came into play to say, well, then time was the element that he really cared the most about. And of course he cares about his people. And of course he wants a good dollar figure. But you have to understand your goals in that. Are you okay staying in the business part-time? Or do you want to leave immediately? Maybe you actually do want to stick around because you're not completely done with it. You just don't want to be the main guy anymore. Maybe you do want to still have that cash flow. So maybe you get hired back on as a consultant. It might be necessary that you stay on for the transition period, right? Well, what kind of salary does that look like? Do you need the health benefits? I definitely get people who sell their business, but they say, you know what? I need to stay on, at least in some capacity, to continue to get the health insurance that we've built up. That's completely understandable. That should be a goal that you need to be aware of if you want to sell your business. Now, there's also your employees. If you have a number of employees, it might be really important to you that they are taken care of. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not belittling you if you're not prioritizing your employees first and foremost. You might be in a business where there's high turnover and that's just kind of the nature of the business, or where you don't have very many employees. Okay, well, that happens, right? Or maybe all your people are really contractors, so they have that flexibility anyway. But we know that I might be talking to you that has that business where really you raise those people up and they look to you as family and you don't want to just leave them hanging. You want to make sure they're left in good hands. Well, again, who the buyer is, you need to make sure that they align with that. Your values. Oh man. I mean, definitely in today's market, you have to know, it's pretty easy to understand what your competitor is doing, right? What these other people who might be potential buyers, what they value versus what you value. And you might not want the business that you've, cared for and that you've built over this time to be used in a misalignment to what you're trying to do for a bigger purpose. It's not the legacy you want to leave. All right, well, then knowing your values and that you want to align with that. Are you open to seller financing? That's a big question. It's one I can't overlook, right? If you need somebody who has the money right away, that's going to be different. Somebody paying cash, that's going to be different than, okay, you might have some time here to sell over an SBA loan or conventional financing, or they might not qualify for those. Are you okay doing seller financing? You want to know whether you're open to that up front, so you don't end up in that situation where you're regretting taking the seller financing, taking the risk, basically playing the bank. You don't want to fall into that situation because you didn't consider it ahead of time. So know whether or not what kind of financing you're going to allow, or maybe you do just want cash. I'm like, I don't care where you get the money, cash and I'm out. Know your goals ahead of time. From there, we can actually understand the goals of your buyers. Understanding the goals of your buyers is something we're going to walk through. As we go through each one of these buyers, the 7 buyers of your business, we're going to talk about what do they care about? What do they prioritize? Because that's going to matter when you are positioning your business for sale. Buyer number one. This is what a lot of people think of, which is almost one of the least common, but it's an independent third party. Someone who you don't really know, they're arm's length, maybe the business got listed online for sale, and maybe they want to get into the industry. Maybe they want to expand their portfolio, right? Maybe they have plans for their bigger empire and this is a necessary piece for it. Maybe it's their dream job. We don't know where the independent third party is coming from, but they're going to have their own set of goals. And you want to understand what those goals are. If at the end of the day you think that that's kind of where you're going to have to go is to sell to an independent third party because there's no one else who's really buying right now or no one else on your list. Because we're going to talk about a number of other buyers that are probably more likely to buy your business. And so this shouldn't be the first go-to is an independent third party. It actually is going to be one of your last. But if you're in that situation, I'm going to start with this one first because it's wide open. They could have a number of goals. Of course, everybody wants to make money, right? That's, of course, going to be part of their goals. But you're going to have to understand that they might say, look, I want to get this at a discounted price. Well, what does that look like? Is this going to be a goal that aligns with what you're going to provide or not, right? And that's going to depend on what kind of demand there is for your business and what you're going to be open and accepting. Again, does it align with your goals in that way, right? So the independent third party, again, it comes to mind for a lot of people as like, oh yeah, I'm thinking about some person coming along and buying my business. But it's not the go-to. It's not the go-to. Actually, there's several others that are way more likely. Let's talk about one of them, which is the number 2 of the 7 buyers here is your competitors. What's called horizontal integration. Horizontal integration where you have somebody within that same level of the playing field, like a competitor who's going to come in and purchase you. Now, a goal of the competitor is probably to expand your customer base, or maybe they need your employees. And that's really important to understand in positioning your business because they probably don't care about your systems. When we talk about some of the other buyers, systems are huge. If you don't have the system in place, they're like, well, I'm not stepping in there. But a competitor already has their own system. They're already functioning in the market. It's what makes them a competitor. So they don't care about those same things. So they want for a good price, and they want to be able to basically take advantage of the market that you already have, the contracts you already have, your client base, your customer base. Though that's what they want, or perhaps they do want your employees, or maybe they want access to some of the suppliers that you have. All right, well, if that's their main goal, you might want to make sure that your contracts are in place, that you have that you're really getting the maximum amount that you can out of the client base if that's what they're interested in. Or make sure that you have employment agreements if they're interested in employees, right? So that you can ultimately maximize what your goal is. And a competitor, it might be adversarial, it might not. You might have competitors. I've had plenty of industries where they weren't like enemies with their competitors. They understood that there were other competitors in the area, and yeah, they were fighting over territories, but it wasn't like some kind of like, oh no, you did no way am I going to sell to that person. But there are some industries that are like that. I once helped a guy expand his business, and the business was listed for sale. And I basically did it anonymously because there was no way he was going to sell to the competitor. Now, I wasn't tricking the guy. The guy literally put it online. Anyone could have purchased it, right? So he was looking for the main price point. But it would have caused an unnecessary kind of tension if he knew that he was selling to one of his competitors. But the guy was literally retiring. He didn't have a bunch of employees. It was really purchase of inventory as well as the client list. And so he was able to then expand his business. And I know after the sale was taking place, the guy who sold the business really didn't care that much. But the important part was that it was a smooth transaction and the buyer and the seller both accomplished their goals in this. Now that's a competitor. Horizontal integration. You can also go vertical, a vertical integration. That's to your supplier above you, right? Or your vendors or whoever, or your customer base, right? You're going up and down in that chain to say, okay, well, maybe it's a supplier that buys you. This can be, a manufacturer who ultimately wants to get into maybe the wholesaling side of it. All right, so they acquire the wholesaling to be able to decrease costs or expand revenue opportunities. That tends to be their main goal, right? So if you've been racking up your costs pretty high, you might want to decrease those if you know that your buyer is ultimately going to be a supplier who's looking to decrease their costs when they do the acquisition. That's what they care about, which then again aligns with a higher price point. It all drives back to ultimately getting either you into position to get your goals, If it's a price point, well, then understand what their goal is. If it's to decrease prices, make sure that you're positioned best because they'll pay more for that because it's what they care about. Make sure if it's a supplier coming to you, that you have your customer base down. Because again, that's one of the reasons they want to get into that. If it's to expand their customer base, to have more of a direct relationship, maybe more control over that supply chain, well, at that point, then yeah, you want to make sure that those relationships are solid in a contract, that they're good relationally, so that when you go to them and say, hey, I'm bringing somebody else in, they're going to take over and do that they trust you, that you already have that relationship, right? So start building this ahead of time. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later in this video, but I want to make sure that you understand when their goals can align with yours, you can maximize both opportunities. And for a supplier or a customer, understanding what they care about, the supplier, we've gone through that. Let's talk about that customer for a second, though. This doesn't make sense for all customers, not all customers. Some B2C businesses aren't going to be able to sell to the C because it's not the right market. We'll talk about that in a bit too. But sometimes your customers are. Let's say you're a wholesaler interested in moving into the manufacturing, again, to decrease your costs. All right, well, the manufacturer selling that business wants to understand that if they're going to be acquired by a wholesaler. Right? If you provide services, maybe there's a customer service arm to a vendor who does software, and they say, well, we want to start getting into the market, so we have that aspect of it. A good example of someone who does this, Amazon. Amazon will reach out to acquire, right, the people who are actually selling online to be able to take advantage of one of those line items. So Amazon's whole business model was originally, they positioned themselves direct to the consumer, but they also were doing that through particular businesses that they would bring on. They would allow anyone to jump onto their marketplace and sell their stuff, but then they started positioning themselves to actually do either acquisition or to take over certain parts. And you see them acquiring logistics. Right? Amazon wasn't originally a logistics company. They weren't in shipping. It's not what they did. But now look how many warehouses they have set up with delivery trucks, and they have control over that aspect. Amazon's done a great job with their vertical integration to be able to truly maximize their market. So if you want to get acquired by somebody who's in that vertical, well, all right, then you want to understand what position that you're in that way. And so whether it's a supplier or a customer, you want to understand what their goals are. And like I said, oftentimes it's to decrease their costs or expand the revenue opportunities. That tends to be what they're driven by. So you want to make sure you position your company accordingly. Let's talk about the next one, which is a fun one. I'm going to call it capital. This might be private equity, or it might be like a family trust. I'm going to refer to whatever money-driven people are acquiring your business, that's their main purpose, is to get a return on their investment. That tends to be the main driving force, that they're expanding their portfolio and they think about money and they are driven by that money. And you have to understand what their goals are. Their goals are going to ultimately be to decrease costs after their acquisition. So they're going to pay a dollar figure that they think is beneficial. And then 6 months, a year in, they're going to start making big old cuts. Well, that's important to understand depending on whether it aligns with your goals or not. I had somebody who they had a possibility of being acquired. They were really a family business. And once they understood, and I'm not saying all private equity falls into this, but generally speaking, you got to watch out because, again, the main point of private equity isn't to be a caring, loving, consortium over your business. They have a portfolio. They have investors that they owe a responsibility to, and it's to put them first. So that family business, if they had gotten acquired, they would have lost some of their employees. They just would have. They weren't running in the most efficient way because their main goal wasn't just a return on investment. Of course, they wanted to be profitable, but they cared about their people, which means they made sacrifices for their people, something that private equity would not want to do, and nor could they. Again, they're not big bad guys. They have their responsibility to their investors, and so their job is to acquire companies that they can make more efficient and that would fit within their portfolio. And then maybe raise those up for sale to another entity. A bigger entity might end up acquiring them. Or maybe it is something more where they work with venture capitalists and take it up to initial public offering. Whatever the private equity goal is, it's going to be driven by money. And so if your main goal, if you have a systematized business that your main goal is ultimately to sell for a highest dollar amount, and really you don't have the employees that you need to look out for in any way, private equity might be great for you if you're in a field that they actually want to acquire you. Private equity doesn't want to go hands-on and manage your business day to day. So oftentimes they want you to stay on for a certain period of time. So does that align with your goals in that way, right? Do you want to stay on for a bit of time? Because a lot of times they'll want you to. You have something that's working and you're part of that and they want you to stay in there, right? Versus like maybe one of your competitors that doesn't want you to stay in there because they got this, all right? They want you gone. Again, I'm kind of stereotyping big picture here, but this is very realistic to understand kind of your market before you position your business in that way. What are their goals? So the other thing with a private equity, again, if you want that biggest dollar amount, you got to be positioning yourself to do that. And we're going to talk about how to do that a little bit later in this video. All right, so flip side of private equity, let's take a look at an employee. A key employee, selling your business to one of them is usually pretty successful if you do it the right way. It can be a wonderful way to steward over somebody, raise them up into the right position where you're grooming them to take over the business, and ultimately then you transition where they take it over to either one or maybe a few key employees. They know the business well. They've been working in the business. They probably already have some of the relationships, so they can build up that level of trust. They know the suppliers or the vendors, they know the customers. And so you can take that time to kind of position them so they can ultimately take it over. One of the biggest hindrances that I see that come up with the employees is sometimes they don't have all the money, right? You've been the boss. You've been making the money, and they don't necessarily have the access to that capital. So sometimes seller financing becomes a part of the play. And that's again, a trusted relationship. And you got to know whether or not that's something that you're open to. Are you going to seller finance for a couple years while you ultimately then allow them to have a balloon payment where they can refinance at that point after a couple years? Are you open to that? Selling to your employees, again, it can be amazing for the transition. But if your main goal is to get a big chunk of money and get out immediately, you might not be able to do that. It takes time to groom them, raise them up. And not all employees are right in that manner. Some of them think that they could take over a business, but really they're just a good salesperson, right? Or they're just really good at their job, but they're not actually a business owner. And so you have to prep them to see if they're ready to think like a business owner to really take over that business. These are going to be crucial steps in understanding what their goals are, and then vetting them for the realism of that is going to be something that we'll have to do as we walk through the qualifications. There is something I at least want to hit on when you're talking about selling to employees, which means selling to all of your employees. So it's called an ESOP, Employee Stock Ownership Plan. If you're a corporation, you can sell basically all of your ownership to your employees, and there's some great tax benefits to it, and your employees now get to run your company. I've seen this done very well where it was a win for the employees and it was a win for the owner, and they grew and they were successful. I've also seen it go the wrong way, where really the owner was just trying to take advantage of his employees, and that was not okay. The way that he went about that was to take advantage to just get this big tax break and this dollar amount, and he left his employees high and dry. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that there's something stable that they're taking on and not just using them for the big chunk of money. So you got to watch out for that. So don't just look at the dollar figure and then turn your employees into objects to take advantage of them in that way. It's something I'm going to warn you all about. If that's what you're interested in, don't come hire me. But I'm also not a main ESOP attorney. We're going to work with a team of people that can help get that transition because ESOPs are super regulated. It might not be right for you because you're just not in the right industry. You have to consistently grow an ESOP. You have to keep growing in that way to get a return. And it's going to be held by a trustee that's going to be managing that. And so if your business is not positioned to be able to grow in that way, then it won't look like you're doing what you're supposed to do. The people who are managing the business won't look like they're doing what they're supposed to do. So don't leave them hanging. Truly understand what it means to do an ESOP, and don't get distracted by just the flashy tax benefits that you can get from it. All right, so we've talked about to the independent third party and competitors and employees, and there's one last one that I want to hit on. Number 7 is a personal friend or family member. I want to caution this one to say that anytime that you work with a personal family member or a friend, whether you're bringing them into the business as a partner or whether you're selling it to them, you got to watch for some assumptions that they might have. They might not understand all the work that you put into this thing and make a presumption that they've seen you do well and seen you with the nice car and all that, and they want to take advantage of that. So they want to step into this thing and they trust that you're going to be there for them. And then you sell the business. It's not quite what they expected. Turns out it's a lot harder than they expected. And turns out one of your goals was to take more vacations. And so you're gone that month when things start catching on fire. That impact is bigger than just the business now, because now you have to go to Thanksgiving dinner and you sit across the table from your brother who's, staring at you while he's eating his turkey. Yeah, you don't want to do that. All right, you don't want to leave people in a particular position if they're not qualified to take it on and you don't plan on staying on a transition period to really help them and raise them up into that if they don't know what they're doing, right? I'm not saying, again, I'm not eliminating all personal friends and family members, but you have to be careful if they're not sophisticated, if they don't know what they're doing, right, to raise them up. I see this with people and their kids. They want their children to take over. They want a family business with that legacy, but their kids aren't really that interested in taking over their business. If that's not their goals, if you don't appreciate their goals and what they truly want, maybe they do need some time out in the world before they're ready to come back and actually take over that business. Well, understanding their goals is going to be important and not trying to force some type of legacy thing on them to try to force this to be some type of family business. It's not going to be healthy. It's not going to turn out well for them. And in fact, it can turn into a lot of resentment. And so having those relationships is going to be more important than trying to force something because you want to keep it in the family. And we also see the flip side where kids want to take over the business. They feel almost entitled to it. Well, that's not okay either, right? That's just as much as that employee who's a great salesperson, but they might not be a great business owner. Well, that person's still better than the entitled person this entitled kid who might not even be good at their job, but think that they deserve to take over this business. They don't get that entitlement. And making sure that those expectations are clear ahead of time to say, okay, if you meet these requirements, if you show that you can actually care about the employees or really be successful in this position, think like a business owner. If you can show that you can do these things, if you build up that track record, right, and then come underneath and get some mentorship and maybe go take some classes about how to read a financial statement, if you take these actions, all right, you'll be positioned to be able to step into this. And if they don't, well, then they don't just get it. All right, so we've hit on all 7, right? Independent third party, which is probably the least likely to come in and buy you up. Competitors are pretty likely. That's entirely a possibility to buy you up. Suppliers or customers, right? Vertical integration, that's number 3. You have capital, which is like, private equity or family trust. You have the employee, you have to all employees, and you have a personal friend or family member. Those are the main 7 that you're going to find. You can find people who maybe fit in between those categories or outside those categories. But again, those are kind of the main 7 that I wanted to hit on today. It's important to know who you're going to work with because you got to understand their goals. The main point, who are you targeting to sell your business? What are your goals? What are their goals? And how do you make them align? Now, moving into how do you choose between them? Well, that's the next great question, isn't it? How do you choose between those? Well, first, you're going to be able to eliminate some that just aren't in your market. Now, you might have some service-based businesses that don't have private equity interested. Honestly, no private equity is knocking on my door to buy my law firm. They just aren't, right? It's not a systematized business that can get that kind of return. The other problem, though, with that is that, there's sometimes licensing or qualifications or certifications that are needed to be had. Well, not everyone can just get those, right? Not everybody just has those. You have to be an attorney to own a law firm, right? You have to have a certain license to be a general contractor. Okay, well, that inherently eliminates some people, right? Sometimes customers, might not be able to purchase your business because they don't have a general contractor license or they don't have any experience. What are they doing taking over your business, right? And it'd be, it wouldn't make any sense to try to target them. If you build homes for people, it's unlikely that, the general contractor that you built a home for a general contractor and then they want to come back and buy your business. I mean, it's unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's not going to be your target market when you're positioning your business for sale. So you can kind of eliminate some of those right offhand. Are they financially able to? All right. You might have customers. The customers that Apple works with generally aren't going to come back and try to buy Apple. I'm not saying Apple's for sale, but if they were, the B2C market, their customers are not the most likely target market to come acquire them. And so you have to understand, you're targeting your customers might not be the right avenue. Perhaps you're in a whole field where the manufacturers, you're a product-based wholesaler or a representative, and the manufacturers don't want to buy your business because that's why they're just a manufacturer, because they're not interested in moving into wholesaling, or they're not interested in moving into retail. They're not interested in taking that next step. Now, don't be presumptuous, right? Don't eliminate somebody because you don't think they can qualify just for financing, right? Unless you're positive. Again, most customers of Apple aren't going to be able to. But don't just eliminate that possibility, right? Don't eliminate them because you don't think that they want you. You can still knock on that door. But again, my main point is to say, well, who are you choosing to best position Because again, it takes a few years to position yourself. And we're going to talk about what that looks like a little bit right after we finish going down this list of how to choose. Eliminating those that don't align with your goals. Again, if you want your people taken care of, private equity might not be your target. Right? If you want your employees taken care of, again, hear me on this. That's not all private equity. There's some good private equity out there that understands that the relationships that you've built up are part of the reason of your success. But that doesn't change the fact that one of their main fiduciary responsibilities is to their investors. And so if they have to make cuts, they have to make cuts, versus raising up a key employee who's been with you for 20 years and they know the other relationships and they care about the other people's families. And if that's one of your main values, then your key employee might be your target market over that private equity. Even if private equity might be willing to pay more. Again, what do you care about? And understanding, then eliminating those people that might not fit that criteria. So let's take a few minutes and now talk about, are you best positioned to sell to that market? You've identified your target market, right? Okay, we went through our 7 buyers. You know your goals, you know their goals, you know your target market, and you want to sell to them. How do you now best position yourself to then sell to them? Because it's not right away. I have too many people who come to me and say, I'd like to sell my business, next year or next month. Well, let me take a look and see if you've been doing your due diligence. And oftentimes they haven't. Some medical thing has come up. And all of a sudden now they need to sell their business. Well, have you been preparing for this? Right? Because sometimes those medical things are a surprise. Sometimes they're not. Right? Sometimes you're older. You should have known that some of this stuff was going to come up and you wanted to start positioning for this. Your wife didn't just now immediately tell you that you should sell your business, right? And she wants to spend more time with you. Or your husband didn't come out of the blue and suddenly be like, yeah, get rid of your business. There's probably been signs along the way, right? And if you knew that exit was coming up, you should have been preparing for that. Some of the ways to prepare for that, again, if you know your market, if you know who you're likely to sell to, put your time maybe into your systems. If it's private equity and they want to see that you're running efficiently and you're going to get the highest dollar amount based on the most efficient systems that you have in place, then work on your systems. Versus if you're selling to a competitor, okay, well, they don't care about your systems because they want your market, right? They want your customers. So focus on your customer relationships and making sure that that's going to be optimally positioned. Right? Building yourself out of the job can be important for private equity. Selling yourself out of the job is important for the competitor. But to do that, you can't just suddenly get systems in place. You can't just suddenly have stronger relationships with your clients. These are things that take time, and you want to invest into that. If you're going to be building up systems where you are not the main person that everything hinders on, is contingent on, right? Not everything is just about you. Getting systems in place like contracts, getting an intake process down for people who come into you, getting delivery down. If logistics are part of what you need to do, well, how does that system? Getting your invoicing and billing set up, right? Your onboarding process for new employees, right? These are factors that you want to have down. These are all systems. If you don't have those systems down, it might be all contingent on you sending out the billing and you having that customer relationship and you doing the intake and the bidding process of everybody who comes in. That's not going to be very successful. And the fact, the more that you have that, the more you've built yourself into a job and the less likely you can sell to certain markets like private equity, right? Or like to a friend and family member. If it's all contingent on you, now all of that knowledge is up here. It's not written down somewhere in policies and procedures that can be duplicated so you aren't taking the burden of all of it. We got to watch out for that. It's all on your shoulders. That's a problem. Same thing with branding. If you've been the face the whole time of how you get people in the door, well, then if your face is gone, there goes your business. That's not worth very much. Right? That's not worth very much to somebody who wants to come in and say, "Oh, I want to take over your business." Well, I kind of need your face. You can't do that if you don't want your face around anymore. You want to go on vacation. You want to take some time off. Well, that's going to be difficult. Right? So maybe you need to learn how to position yourself to sell the brand over you. Keeping those things in mind. Biggest one that I want to hit on here last is, have you been positioning your finances? A lot of people don't like this, but you need to be paying some taxes oftentimes to be able to build up the dollar value, because they're going to come and ask for your 3 to 5 years of financials, which includes both a P&L statement and your taxes. You might need to pay some taxes in the meantime to better have a bigger value of your business when you go to sell. Now, I don't want to undercut any tax professionals out there that know how to do this, know how to make that dollar figure bigger without having to pay more taxes. talk to your CPA or your accountant, all right? Talk to your tax attorney or your tax advisor. We want to work with them to make sure that we're not just completely throwing everything out the window. Hear me. I'm not talking about the tax advice of it. We'll want to have a professional in there who can advise you on that. What I'm talking about is making that bottom line as big as you can. If you're going to do that, don't pay for some big expenses. There's some big expenses over the next 3 to 5 years you might not want to buy because it's going to cut down on your bottom line. And there's business valuations that can add back in one-off expenses, and they can add back in certain things. But generally speaking, if you're doing that consistently, well, then that does not get added back in. Right? It's hard to consider it a one-off expense if you've been consistently buying a bunch of big stuff every single year for this expansion. You got to watch that, and it's balanced against investing into things that are going to increase your profitability ultimately because you know you can sell it for a higher dollar amount. Okay, well, that's important to know. Right? That's important to understand. I've had people who come to me. Right? I had a business that came. They made a particular weapon, and they were an online business. They did great. I wish they would have come to me 3 to 5 years before. I could have doubled that, the value of their business, by simply just positioning them to stop spending so much in certain areas and start increasing their certain prices where they could have had a greater margin, right? I mean, they could have had better customer relationships and some systems in place and better billing practices without such big accounts receivable. There are so many things that we could have done. And some of them are just little tweaks here and there. Some of them are big stuff, but some of them is tweaks here and there that if you just position it right, you get the right contracts in place, it's going to help immensely, right? Having reoccurring revenue through a subscription basis and having a contract in place that kind of reflects that, or a 5-year contract, is way better than that handshake that you had. It might be some tough conversations with your clients to get that in place. Yeah, maybe, but it's going to help ultimately, depending on your target market, for your market to reach their goals. So this is what's critical about positioning your business. Let me know. I can help you get your business in the best position. And I do have relationships with great tax advisors who are going to be able to help you on that side too. And so we can set you up for the best things for transfer of that with liability purposes to make sure that you're getting the most out of your business, that the transition period is as short and long as you want it to be, and that ultimately that you're in the best tax position that you can be as well. Again, we want to make sure that we're taking all these things in consideration when we're positioning your business ahead of time, getting it ready for sale. Thank you for joining me today. If you want to learn more about how to best position your business for sale and then find the right buyers, reach out to me at the link below.